right. Well, I think we can get started here. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Chris Lestrino. For those of you who have not met me before, I am the founder and CEO of Kingscrowd. And as always at Kingscrowd, our goal is to empower investors to make informed, thoughtful investment decisions in the equity crowdfunding ecosystem. And we do that by aggregating 100% of Reg CF and Reg A equity and debt deals in private companies. And then we've created a rating algorithm where we score those companies on key fundamentals, everything from revenue and revenue growth to burn rates to valuation, revenue multiples, founding team's experience, so on and so forth. And then from there, those companies highly rated by our algorithm will do a deep dive, speak with the founders many times, and ultimately decide whether or not to invest out of our Kingscrowd Capital fund, which is approaching nearly 60 investments to date. And we're looking to invest in 100 companies over a 4-year time period, really looking for those best-in-class companies across the market. And then what we like to do is host webinars like this, where we give you a deep dive on all things about that company, where you're going to have an opportunity to hear directly from the founders themselves and the executive teams of these companies that we're investing in, and have your questions answered live, so you can really get a good sense of these businesses before you decide whether to invest or not. So with that, we have one of our latest investments from Kingscrowd Capital on today in EndoSound. And in just a second here, we will be joined by Dr. Steven Steinberg and Josh Cohn, who are the founders. And Dr. Steven Steinberg is the Chief Medical Officer of EndoSound, and Josh is the Chief Commercial Officer of EndoSound, which is a really, really interesting business that I'm excited to dive in on. It's a medical device company that is providing more affordable access to ultrasound technology, which allows for better and more advanced and early GI disease detection at a far better price than traditional solutions in the ultrasound space. So we're going to bring them on here. This is a really, really interesting business that's doing very well, has some very real traction in the medical setting. And we're going to do a deep dive with them. And then around the 30-minute mark, we'll have our analyst, Teddy, come on and explain a little more about why we decided to invest at Kingscrowd Capital. And then we'll get to all of your questions. So please do drop into the Q&A section here at the bottom of your Zoom screen, any questions you have along the way, and we'll work to get to them as around the 30-minute market when we get there. So, Steven, Josh, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, Chris, great. Thank you for having us.
It's a real pleasure to have you guys on today. So I want to start with a little bit of background on you both. I know you have an interesting kind of backstory of how you've come together. So tell us a little bit about yourselves and your backgrounds, and then we will get into what EndoSound is all about.
So perhaps I'll start. So my name is Steve Steinberg. I'm a practicing therapeutic endoscopist. That means I do surgical procedures through a scope. And I've been doing that for the better part of 45 years. And a lot of what I do involves the latest technology in endoscopy scopes and in ultrasound as well. And over the years, it's evolved so that ultrasound has become a major part of the kinds of things that I do, the treatments that I offer, the diagnoses that I do. And it became obvious to me that the existing solutions that were pretty much formalized in 1995 by Pentax, Fuji, Olympus, and which haven't changed in the last 25 years and have a price tag in excess of $500,000, was limiting access. And so I was seeing lots of patients who could have been seen elsewhere, but for the fact that there was no technology available. And about that time, my wife happened to be the provost and therefore head of tech transfer for Oregon Health Sciences, and was having a meeting with some guys who wanted to present technology to OHSU. It was about ultrasound. She asked if I wouldn't sit in. And so I sat in on the meeting, and they were talking about a technology where you could put an ultrasound device on the end of a finger with the idea that medics in the battlefield could triage soldiers for injuries under their flak jackets. And so I looked at that and said, well, hey, if you could put a transducer on the end of a finger, why couldn't you put one on the end of my scope? And convert the standard scope that all gastroenterologists, everybody who does endoscopy has access to, convert that into what is otherwise a $95,000 piece of equipment to get started. As you can imagine, it was not that easy. But the person that I met there was Scott Corbett, who's a Penn-trained ultrasound engineer, Siemens background, GE background. And so the two of us set off on what was now a 7-8 year odyssey to get to the point of a product that we think is having some traction and interest in the marketplace. The other critical piece of the team was Josh. Josh was my rep.
This newly appointed regional sales director there, and met Steve, and kind of the rest is kind of history. But that's how we first met. And since then, we've traveled 3 continents together, following EndoSound each continent, supporting clinical cases. It really is a marriage of industry and physician innovators that I think lots of folks kind of dream of. You kind of hope that industry can work well with physician innovators and build relationships that are long lasting. And that's kind of what Steve and I have created. So appreciate all the kind remarks, Steve. But as you mentioned, been in the GI space for 20 years, and this has probably been the best now 4.5 full-time years I've spent in the GI space. I did consult for EndoSound for a couple years prior, but it's been a great ride, and we're happy to be here on your show.
That's pretty fantastic. I want to take a step back and let's talk about the technology. What does this look like, and how does it innovate on the model that's existed for 20, 30, 40 plus years? And then the one other part that I want to understand here is like, how did you get here in terms of like you saw this technology, on the military side, but how have you actually been able to get that technology and integrate it into your new solution at this lower price?
So again, the existing, we call it legacy technology, consists of the big ultrasound box that maybe everybody's familiar with if they've been around a hospital. It goes about $250,000. It is paired and has been paired with endoscopes, right? Devices that have optical imaging that allows you to put a scope through somebody's mouth into the stomach to look around. And those scopes have a built-in transducer associated with them. And that brings the price ticket to about $95,000 per scope. The scopes are delicate, they break. My service contract alone is $100,000 per year just for the service contract. All right. And so all of that led to what we perceived as a problem of access. It was simply not available at the places where patients most needed it. And so the challenge was, well, how do you improve on that? And so the question of, could you put a transducer on a regular scope, a scope that everybody already owns? So now you take away the major cost of the scope, that $95,000, because the docs already have 4, 5, 6 of them in their offices or in their surgery centers or in the hospitals. And the idea was then to find a way to add a transducer to that existing scope in a way that maintained the functionality, that provided imaging that was comparable, because imaging is king in our world. If you can't see well, you can't do things in a quality way. And so that was our challenge. And having an ultrasound engineer with 20, 30 years of experience was obviously key to that journey. And while the military solution was a kind of an aha moment, we realized that it wasn't, it was a long way from what we needed on the medical side, on the scope side. And so it was probably 3 years of iterating and trying different variations in order to get to a device that was a real world solution that physicians would be anxious to pick up and use.
Now, in terms of, well, first off, what is the price point of your product kind of in comparison to what's out there? And then is there any differences in quality, and would that, create or prevent folks from adopting this technology?
So Josh, you want to do the pricing?
We're a fraction of the cost of traditional systems. We're list price somewhere around 50,000 for a whole capital solution that it provides that client with 2 transducers, et cetera. And as far as how it compares to the legacy system, Steve alluded to it a little bit ago. Imaging is king. Imaging is the first question everybody has. Thankfully, when we start these evaluations with folks, the highlight of every evaluation is our imaging. So Steve and Scott obviously knew we weren't going to go to market with something that was inferior from an image perspective. So that was the first checkbox that was kind of checked off. So from a technology perspective, we're a little different, but we provide the same level of clinical care for these patients that legacy systems provide. And quite frankly, because there's just greater access, we're not just talking about hospitals. The majority of colonoscopies and EGDs are done in an ambulatory care setting. And that's because the costs are lower for the patient, the costs are lower for the payers. Physicians are more efficient. So the ASC is an ideal spot for these endoscopies to be performed. And the barrier to entry into that market historically has been the high cost of these systems. Sure, you could have a used system, you could get it for $300,000, but even then, compared to the EndoSound price tag, still very high and hard to justify. When we took away that barrier of price, and went in on a price point, an entry price point that was, made sense. That's why we are where we are today. The demand for our product in the ambulatory care center is high. Our pipeline is growing by the day. And there's a huge opportunity out there to continue to migrate these procedures from the hospital to the surgery center in the hands of trained endoscopic ultrasound physicians, mind you. So not trying to train new users. We're just trying to get existing users to move these procedures to a safer and more affordable and more efficient location in the ambulatory care center.
So,
Oh, Chris.
for those who don't know what an ambulatory care center is, can you talk about what that is and how it differentiates from a hospital? When do you go there versus going to a hospital?
Well, there's kind of 2 points to that question. Typically, the physician defines where the patient goes. Okay, so if a physician has an ambulatory surgery center that they can do procedures at, they're typically, and that patient meets a certain criteria that it's safe to be done in a surgery center, the physician is going to choose the surgery center every time, mainly because it's more efficient. And oftentimes they have an ownership stake in that surgery center, so that they make more profit when those procedures are done there. So the physician, to some degree, chooses where those procedures are done. But from a patient perspective, they prefer the ASC as well. So to give you an idea, when you go to a big hospital, especially an academic hospital, you've got to navigate parking decks, you've got to navigate different floors, elevators, wings, where to check in, et cetera, et cetera. An ambulatory surgery center is typically a single building, maybe a part of other offices or whatnot. But when you walk in, you check in right at the front, right? You're in pre-op maybe 15 minutes later. You're in your procedure maybe 45 minutes after you checked in, and you're literally out within a couple hours of you getting there. So patients prefer it, much more efficient. And because we don't have hospital-acquired infections in the surgery center like you do in the hospital, it's a safer environment. And mind, I just mentioned one more thing. Medicare is looking to move many of these same procedures and other specialties as well to the surgery center because the costs to Medicare are significantly lower in an ambulatory surgery center. And those private payers have the same motivation to move these procedures from a high-cost hospital to a lower cost surgery center with with the quality of care being the same, if not better.
So Chris, if I can backtrack maybe just a little bit for those viewers who may not know the space of endoscopic ultrasound, I think everybody's familiar with surface ultrasound, right? That transducer that gets laid on somebody's abdomen and provides you the gender reveal, right? That technology. Well, imagine that same technology on a scope. So regular ultrasound is from the outside in. Endoscopic ultrasound is the same technology, same basic technology from the inside out. And because you're looking at from the inside out, you get views and access to areas and organs and tissues that aren't so easily reachable if you were working from the surface. But otherwise, the technology is proven technology that's been around for years and years. And in a sense, it's like CT scan and MRI. It's an imaging modality. And it's sort of like if you can see something, then you can do something. If you can see something on CT scan, you can take a biopsy. If you see something on endoscopic ultrasound, you can take a biopsy. You can put radioactive seeds into it. You can sample it. You can do therapy. You can do a whole host of things.
In terms of the GI application, what types of things are you looking for in these kind of GI procedures when you're going in and looking around?
So,
Cancers?
sure. So there are two categories. Oftentimes, so in my practice, I probably do, I don't know, maybe 2,000 of these a year. All right. And many of them are done because something was seen on other imaging. So a patient has a CT scan or an MRI for some reason. There might be something seen in the pancreas or elsewhere. And endoscopic ultrasound is a better, more precise way of visualizing those abnormalities and, if need be, sampling. So there's a whole category of we're asked to evaluate findings that have been discovered because somebody looked with a scope or other imaging. There's a second whole category, which we think is unique to our platform and our capability, and that's the diagnostic platform. And so, for example, if you went to your primary care doc with belly pain, say, you might be put on an acid drug, a so-called proton pump inhibitor, omeprazole, purple pill, something like that. And then if that didn't work, you might be told you needed an upper endoscopy, a scope through the mouth to look in your stomach to find an explanation for those symptoms. Well, it turns out that there's good data over the last 25 years that says if you had an exam that instead of just looked around at the surfaces, but instead was able to look at surrounding structures with an ultrasound, that increases the yield rate by almost a third. 35% of people will have findings with the ultrasound portion of that exam that were not seen with the regular optical exam. And now click to the fact that there are 6 million of those diagnostic procedures done. So that 6 million becomes our target audience for adding endoscopic ultrasound to a standard EGD. And that gets us to TAMs in the billions.
So in terms of your business model, I know you mentioned it's around 50K for the device. Is there a per use fee of some sort, a service fee? What does that look like?
Yeah, there's no service, which is again another advantage of our platform versus those of legacy systems. But we have a disposable. It's an ultrasound adapter. This device is single use and it's used to attach our transducer, the part that actually visualizes those areas that Steve discussed. It attaches that transducer to that standard endoscope. That ultrasound adapter, which we charge for $650, is covered by the transitional pass-through program of Medicare. So for Medicare patients, this is completely free to the facility. It's covered by the transitional pass-through code. And then what we found in the marketplace is that private payers are also following suit. Aetna, for example, covers the full cost of this device. And then some of the other payers cover portions of it. So what it does is it really does reduce the cost per procedure for those surgery centers to perform endoscopic ultrasound. So it's for many centers, the cost per procedure makes a ton of sense for them to move the volume from the hospital to the surgery center.
And
So
that Medicare subsidy, Chris, is only available to our EndoSound platform. It's not available to the legacy systems.
now, one of the things that I think is exciting about your proposition, right, is you're giving these kind of ambulatory surgery centers an opportunity to monetize and have their appointments have more value as well, right? So they don't have to refer to the hospital. That's awesome and good for them. The question that I have for you is like, everything you're saying, it's like, well, this is kind of a no-brainer. Like, why wouldn't everyone do this, right? So you're at about 1.5 million in revenue as a fiscal year 24. How do you push that forward? I mean, it feels like it should be tens of millions or hundreds of millions, and I know these things take time and adoption, but what's the barrier to you guys really scaling this thing?
So it's time, a little bit of time, and medical device. Oftentimes, Gen 1 products don't even make it into a hospital, right? It's there to test proof of concept, to evolve the product, et cetera. We're fortunate enough to have a very good Gen 1 product. We've got very happy clients across the country, from North Carolina to California. We have repeat users. They're paying for our product. But we have recognized from a very early stage that in order to scale to the scale that we want to scale, we want to make sure that we make some small changes. These aren't technical issues. These are just because it's a medical device, takes a lot of time and a lot of money. So we intend on actually launching Gen 2 at the end of this year. We are on track. We've hit some pretty major milestones from an R&D perspective that gives us a high level of confidence. At the end of this year, we will launch Gen 2. The beginning of next year, we'll have another product that we'll launch as part of Gen 2. And in those efforts, we intend to scale the organization quite significantly. We have a bench of representatives that are ready to join us. We have a pipeline of over 20 sites that are ready to move forward with Gen 2. We have signed agreements with some of the largest management companies in the space. They manage hundreds of ambulatory surgery centers that do GI. We have agreements in place. I think when you invest in the EndoSound team, you're investing into a team that has a ton of knowledge in the space. We've seen it been done right ways, the wrong ways. One of the fastest way to go out of business is to scale too soon. And we wanted to be very methodical about how we went after the market. So I think we feel very comfortable with where we're at as an organization with our install base. I think we have over 90% win percentage. So when we go out into the field, we win because we've attracted the right target. That physician's an early adopter. They understand the pros and the cons, et cetera, at no expense to the patient. Clinically, we're fine. It's just some of those usability stuff that we want to make better. So long answer, but I think what we'll see next year with Gen 2 is a significant increase in revenue, and we'll do that with a much larger team. So right now, we have one clinical sales support specialist. That's it. Myself, a vice president of marketing. Thankfully, Steve can even, because he knows a thing or two about EUS, he can actually sit in on a case here and there, which is huge value. But I think next year will be one of those years where we see the hockey stick, right? All these startups want to see a hockey stick, and hopefully that's what we're able to provide.
Well, you hit on
Chris,
a few things. Oh, go ahead.
Evidence of the enthusiasm is that a substantial number of our investors are physicians in the GI space, are people like Josh who are in the GI space in other companies who have invested in us. And in fact, after purchasing our equipment, a number of our clients have become investors as well. So I think it's testimony to the fact that people who are hands-on, knowledgeable, recognize the value and the potential for what we're doing. And we're really excited about that interest in particular.
Yeah, let's dive in on a few things that you mentioned there. So first off, help me understand just on average with the folks that you're working with on that kind of per use model, right? They have to kind of buy the each one of the probes that they're using, or not the actual probe, but the piece that you sell them. How many on average are they using per year based on the number of procedures, and what does that come out to like revenue wise? Because it says right as that install base grows, that number grows too and becomes a recurring thing.
So our goal is to get to facilities that can do 10 a month, so 120 a year. We think that's achievable. In some of our higher volume centers right now, they're on pace to do that. Being a new technology, as you go into the surgery center, we have a little bit of both. We have some centers that do 4 or 5 a month, and we have some that are doing 15 or 20 a month. So the goal is 10. If you do that math, it's about $65,000 per center at a minimum, right? If they do roughly 100 a year, $650 each. That's 65 grand. Cost of capital being somewhere around 50 grand. So in that first year, we're getting over $110,000 in revenue from each site. And then we hope to grow that. Typically, that volume is when you have one physician that does EUS. We've been very targeted right now, but in the future, we would likely go after those facilities that have multiple EUS physicians that do endoscopic ultrasound, which would open the opportunity and a larger volume. 200, 250 a year is not unattainable for some of these ASCs with multiple trained EUS physicians. So that's kind of where we want to go.
You also mentioned that you have these agreements with management companies that work with ASCs. What are those? How do they work? Would love to understand a little bit more of the mechanics there.
Yeah, so take large management company that manages 250 GI centers, or some of those are multi-specialty where they may do other specialty procedures as well, but they do have GI inside that endo center. Out of those 250, we've recognized that about 50 of them are capable of doing EUS. So what we have in place with them is a master agreement that basically says, here's your pricing. It's guaranteed for 2 years. We won't go up on it. And we're going to give you special pricing because we can get into these 50 centers much easier. And in this case, this particular group has sent emails on our behalf, essentially saying, hey, here are technologies that you should be looking at to increase your revenue and the number of services that you offer. In the endoscopy space, there just really isn't that much extra to offer. They've pretty much done everything they can. They can do a colonoscopy. They can do an upper endoscopy. They can charge for anesthesia. They can charge for pathology. Some of them do pain management, but they've kind of maxed out what they can do. This is a brand new service line because we've eliminated that barrier cost, and these management companies are going to want to let their centers know, hey, here's another opportunity for revenue. So that's kind of what they do for us and what we do for them.
And Chris, one of the other advantages of the master agreement is they essentially have validated the technology. So each individual center doesn't have to do its own due diligence with respect to the technology. The master agreement is essentially saying, hey, we have pricing. The technology works. It should be of interest to you. You don't have to go further in terms of validating the technology itself.
Got it. One more question for you, and we'll bring Teddy on in the meantime to kind of dive in on why we decided to invest at Kingscrowd Capital. So you talked about, this idea of kind of getting into the ambulatory surgery centers and this being a new revenue stream. The reality is, if it's comparable in the imaging and it's far more affordable, yeah, I guess hospitals to a degree, maybe they're a little less price sensitive, but from what I understand, hospitals are struggling too. If there's a world where they could get a far more affordable solution for doing these procedures, wouldn't they want to do that? How long do you think it takes until you could get adoption in the hospital segment as well? Or do you just see that not as a viable option? It doesn't make sense.
So we're actually installed in 2 hospital centers. One's a major academic medical center in Chicago. They use our device for a niche that they cannot do with, or prefer not to do with, the legacy systems. It's work in the colon. Okay. The second hospital system is right up our alley. Physician who trained to do endoscopic ultrasound. So I'll also answer a question in the chat right now too. So it does require an additional year of training to do endoscopic ultrasound. You have to be accredited in order to do that, or credentialed in order to do that. There are some programs out there that you can do it in 6 months, et cetera, but for the most part, it requires a 1-year fellowship. But in the example that I'm giving in the second hospital, we had an EUS trained physician who did not have equipment at their hospital. The hospital could not or would not justify the purchase of a $500,000 system. So here you have a physician that did an extra year of training, right? Forewent, that extra, or that year of being able to make significant money, right? Because as a fellow, they really just don't make a ton of money. And essentially went and got trained, went to a hospital, and they wouldn't buy him the equipment. So at our price point, we were able to provide that hospital with an affordable solution for this physician to start doing procedures that he spent an extra year being trained on. And we installed that a couple months ago. He's very happy. He's doing endoscopic ultrasound in that center. And it's a great example of what we can do in the hospital market. So in the first example in Chicago, I think we absolutely can be an adjunct to existing systems. They break, they're expensive to repair, and they oftentimes do not get loaners in time. We would make a very affordable solution for them to have 100% uptime. For the rural hospitals where it's very expensive and hard to justify, we make a great affordable option for those physicians that are trained to do EUS.
Got it.
And Chris, one of the other pieces is that, for example, even a hospital that already has legacy EUS equipment, they could literally set up a second room for the cost of one scope, one legacy scope. They could get a whole additional room. One of the reasons that, Josh has focused and the team has focused more on ASCs is also the sales cycle in hospitals is a lot longer. And so we've got low-hanging fruit in the ASCs. We take the hospitals as we can But again, sales cycles in hospitals can sometimes be arduous. And if we've got quicker, faster sales opportunities, those are the ones we focus on first.
Got it. Well, Teddy, thanks for coming on here. Teddy is one of our senior associates here at Kingscrowd who spent a lot of time diving in on EndoSound over the past couple of months before we decided to invest. So, Teddy, please tell us a little bit about why we decided to invest at Kingscrowd Capital.
Yeah, thank you, Chris, Josh, and Stephen. Great to have you both here.
Thank you.
Yeah, so when kind of diligencing companies in the health tech, med tech, early stage pharma, what I'm always looking for is signals and evidence that de-risk the investment opportunity in some way. So, I mean, of course, you could say that for any startup in any industry, really, but I think it's particularly pronounced in these industries due to the increased capital and runway risk associated with companies raising in these industries. So, with EndoSound, there were three main sort of de-risking factors that I saw. So first is that medtech companies that are raising equity crowdfunding rounds specifically generally do not have FDA clearance, which of course EndoSound does have with its 510(k) clearance. And with a 510(k) clearance, while it is, a faster, less expensive process than something like a de novo clearance, FDA is of course still a large bureaucratic organization, lots of red tape to get a 510(k) clearance through. So I think given that EndoSound got clearance, especially with the breakthrough device designation, I think it was particularly impressive and very much means that when submitted, the FDA considered EndoSound as likely to provide a significant advantage over existing technology, which from everything we've heard can certainly say that's the case. So secondly, when analyzing med tech deals that are seeking or have obtained 510(k) clearance in particular, that means that the company is basing their technology on a predicate technology. So, which means, of course, there's something in the market that serves a similar purpose in a similar way, which of course we know is the legacy systems. And so what that means is when you're evaluating a company that has 510(k) clearance, you really need to look into whether the new device is a significant upgrade from the legacy or the prior technology. That's really what makes an opportunity investable. So, of course, we know with EndoSound, it's clearly the case. But what was interesting is it's not in the way that you would normally expect in terms of an improvement, because most of the time, these companies, when they get 510(k) clearance, they're really increasing or enhancing the output of the device. Whereas with EndoSound, what it's really improving is access, which I thought was very interesting, very cool. And you could argue with a company with a device that where the legacy systems cost, nearly $500,000, improving access and distribution of the product and the process is even more important than necessarily improving the outputs of the technology itself. So that's really something I really liked about EndoSound. It's taking a procedure in the US that is a clear gold standard for diagnosing GI issues, but makes it far cheaper, more accessible, and opens up the market from just that subset of hospitals that could afford the legacy systems to now the thousands of ASCs and smaller hospitals that could benefit from this technology. And lastly, what I, of course, especially in very capital intensive industries like this, I always look for signaling from investors. So in medtech, of course, we love to see VC investors involved, which EndoSound, of course, has with GEO MedTech Ventures, Varia Ventures. But what was interesting about EndoSound to me was it really goes a step further than that, with EndoSound receiving investments from the very community that it's selling to. So you can see right on their raise page, there's two doctors, one interventional gastroenterologist, and a bariatric surgeon that have invested in the company. So I think that's a pretty rare thing to see, the actual practitioners in the space that the device is selling to actually investing into the company, which I thought was a great signaling effect. And additionally, of course, the American Gastroenterological Association Venture Fund, so the top professional organization for digestive disorders, their venture fund invested in EndoSound as well. So all in all, there's other things we could dive into, of course, traction and all of that, but I think they've done a good job of explaining that. And so all in all, I would say, EndoSound really showed these evidence of de-risked medical device opportunity, I would say. Sorry, jumbled my words there, but it's really showed evidence that it is a de-risked medical device opportunity, and one we're very excited to back. So.
Terrific. Thank you, Teddy.
Excellent.
Appreciate it. And for folks who want to check it out, we do have on the Kingscrowd website, and we'll drop the link here in the chat to everyone. You can check out our report on why we decided to invest as well and see their rating was a 4.2 out of 5 and why they scored that way. So you get a little bit of a deeper dive. So definitely check that out if you're interested. In the meantime, we are going to get to some questions that we have from the crowd. So first one, if you build new versions of the EVS, will you require another FDA clearance?
Well, either one of us could answer. I'll answer, Steve. So there is a letter to file strategy that the FDA allows for companies like ours to pursue, and that is the route that we are pursuing with these products. So we do not need to submit for an additional 510(k) based on our current, discussions with regulatory consultants, et cetera. So our pathway will be a letter to file. This does not eliminate the need to do all of the work, V&V, et cetera, required for FDA clearance. It just does not require an actual submission. So we will letter to file it in our internal records. The FDA will be able to see that once they audit us in the future. It's not a letter. Don't be confused by the name letter to file. It's probably thousands of documents that the R&D team is working on. So anyhow, we will pursue the letter to file strategy.
Terrific. What are the main technical differences between a $400,000 plus EUS and your $40,000 EndoSound vision system?
I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, sure. It's an interesting question. So, we haven't had a picture, but if you were to see the device that we're talking about, if anybody's had colonoscopy, imagine a scope like that that's shorter, and a plastic attachment with a transducer, a small transducer, maybe the size of the tip of your finger, that's attached to the scope. And then ours is computer-based, so it's laptop computer-based and a set-top box size piece of hardware. So literally our device, instead of being rolled around the hospital on a big cart, could fit in your computer bag and be transported from room to room, facility to facility, or country to country. In terms of imaging, we've already talked about the fact that the imaging has been judged to be comparable by a variety of standards. We've had two GLP studies, which are the best lab practices studies that were required by the FDA, once against Pentac, one against Olympus, and in each instance, the imaging was judged to be comparable to both of those legacy systems. But the more important issue is that people take it in their hands, they look at the image, and they're both surprised and impressed because they can't imagine that coming out of a small little system like that, we can get the image that we have. And our goal, needless to say, is to continue to improve that. Technology gets better, software and algorithms get better, and we expect that we will both have better imaging and keep pace with the legacy systems as they go forward.
One more key difference, I would consider us an over-the-scope technology. So we fit over the scope. There's an additional cable in the physician's hand, which is different than a traditional system. The benefit to us is we're working with gastroenterologists that have used devices like this for years. So we're not the only over-the-scope technology. Interventional gastroenterologists are used to using over-the-scope technologies now for the last decade, thanks to some other companies and startups that have kind of built that space. So big technical difference there between the two of us. We're over the scope. They're just one scope. But again, these users are accustomed to it.
When you bring a new product to market, you typically hear both praises and pushbacks. What are the types of comments, both positive and negative, that gastroenterologists make when they hear about the EVS?
Yeah, I think we went to the most important one, which was the image. I think the people have a sense that because one technical difference between the legacy scopes and our setup is legacy scopes because of the way the transducer has to be set up, has the optical view, the view that you see on the television, off to the side. So it's like driving a car forward, but looking through the passenger window as you drive forward. Our arrangement puts the transducer on a scope that already looks forward, so the operator is looking where they are driving. They're looking through the windshield, they're seeing where they're going. So it makes a variety of activities a little easier, especially for people who are perhaps less experienced. If you were to talk about pushback, I think the first is that when somebody has, I've got maybe 10,000 procedures under my belt with legacy systems. And so when you pick up something that handles differently, it's different. And our experience has been that it takes our adopters on the order of 10 to 15 procedures before they start saying, I got this, and I understand how this works, and I understand how to, easily and seamlessly bring this in. That's not to say that for those first 15 procedures that they aren't successful, right? The procedures have all been successful, but what happens is the time goes down. So maybe the first procedure takes longer than the 15th, and then they get in stride and sail away from there.
I'll also add, to the question, everything is not rosy. We're not perfect. Some of the pushback and things that we're looking to address in Gen 2 are really difficult to kind of explain on a webinar. But truth be told, there are out there, but none of them are technical challenges and none of them have an effect on patient care. It's more of a outside the patient usability, things like that quite frankly don't affect patient care, but affect a little bit of the usability of the physician when we are addressing those in Gen 2. And again, there's not a technical issue there. So it's a great question. And again, wish I could explain it a little bit better, but we're addressing the issues that have been brought up by our users.
When you think 2-3 years out from now, what does success look like for you all?
I mean, from which lens, I guess.
So let me
go
give you
ahead.
my fantasy, and then Josh will give you his. I think I've been doing therapeutic endoscopy for coming on 40 odd years, and it's a fabulous space to be in because I get to make diagnosis, to use scopes to actually improve the quality of patients' lives, and then every once in a while even to save a life. I have a letter from a woman who wrote that the fact that we used endoscopic ultrasound to find a very early pancreatic cancer and provide a cure for that patient allowed her to continue to the 56-year-old romance that she had. I get those letters, and that's really cool. And I think if I were to tell you my fantasy would be that access was improved so that everybody's getting those letters. And furthermore, that the underdeveloped world, the underserved world areas which have no access to this technology, suddenly it becomes a part of their armamentarium as well. And if that were the culmination of my career, I'd consider that a really outstanding way to finish off. Josh will tell you the other lens.
Yeah, I mean, from a business and an organization, the proof of concept is done. The opportunity is enormous. As proud as I am of the team that we have in place and even my capabilities to scale the organization, I ran a $60 million budget at Pentax Medical with 40 reps and 5-6 regional sales directors. In order to build that here, that'd be hard, right? And would require a lot of work and effort. And from my perspective, what's the goal, right? Our goal is to, create shareholder, wealth. And in the ideal world, I think we would exit to a large major GI strategic, ones that have been in discussion with for many years now. We would get this to a point where, we're in 40 or 50 sites and people realize that this is a game changer. The medical device space has changed over the last decade. 10 years ago, an idea like this would have been sold before FDA clearance, period, right? It just would. That's not the case anymore. Just like VC funds are delaying their investments, so are strategics. And I'm taking it from a different light. Steve took it from a clinical perspective. From my perspective, I want to see us exited in the next 12 to 18 months, 24 months. And we've got a lot of work to do before that. But I want to do that so that we can fulfill Steve's dream even faster, right? This is going to be scaled much more quicker, much more easier in the hands of a large major GI strategic that has 100 sales professionals in the field, right? There's opportunities to train more doctors, train more gastroenterologists. Someone asked a great question. What does it take to be able to do EUS? And I mentioned it earlier. It's a year of EUS fellowship. With AI coming and AI being able to assist physicians to determine what different organs look like and what they're seeing, there's no reason why we can't train more gastroenterologists to do endoscopic ultrasound. And that would fulfill part of Steve's dream too, putting our technology in the hands of more gastroenterologists that are trained to provide a better procedure for the patient. And we have a picture, right? And it shows, an esophagus, a stomach, and a duodenum. And then the other one shows your liver and your pancreas and your gallbladder. Like as a patient, if you could choose which procedure to have, which one would you choose? You would always choose the one that allows you to see more, right? And that's what EndoSound allows for physicians to do. We eliminate that barrier of cost to that facility, to that physician to now be able to offer this as more of a mainstream type of procedure, just like colonoscopy, right? So that's my dream. It kind of coincides with Steve's dream, and it kind of helps both of them come together. It fulfills both our dreams.
And Chris, Josh mentioned the AI side. That's, obviously a big buzzword. In GI, it's been a staple for a while, and we have at least two AI partners that we are working with the aim of using AI to help train and facilitate people's activities. And also, for example, one that has the ability to pick up small lesions in the pancreas early. And we're really excited about that because that enhances our positioning as a screening opportunity for patients with the disease that has obviously been a real challenge for us clinically over the years. And we're hoping that with early detection, with AI helping, that we can bend the curve, we can change the landscape.
One last technical question for you. On the insurance side, do you have to go insurer by insurer, like, Aetna, United, so on and so forth, and get their approval to be covered by them? And how long and how hard is that process?
So we don't do that. Our clients do that. And it is a great question, and one that I didn't attempt to try and address during the previous comments about scalability. This is a great idea. Why isn't everybody using it? Part of this controlled market release is to do that proof of concept from a reimbursement perspective as well, just not the technology. So we have seen private payers, the Blue Crosses, the Aetnas, the Humanas. We've seen them reimburse for our disposable, but it is done at the facility level, unfortunately. So, we have to work hand in hand with them. Our clients are amazing. They've provided us redacted explanation of benefits, helping us understand which payers are paying and how much they're paying so that we can get our consulting team that we have, the Pinnacle Health Group, help them, talk to the different payers to make sure that reimbursement is in line with what others are receiving across the country, but also that they're getting their fair share. So it is a discussion that each site has to have. Most of these contracts are already negotiated, and the payers don't allow for you to typically negotiate in the middle of a contract. So sometimes they have to wait till the end of the contract to get a better rate. But we're seeing a good amount of reimbursement from the private payers to these facilities because it's to their benefit to have these procedures done in the ASC too. So to give you an example, the average cost to do an EUS at a surgery center for a payer might be around $1,800, somewhere around there. But to do it in a hospital, it's going to cost them $8, $9, $10,000. So it saves the payers a significant amount of money to have these done in the surgery center as well.
Chris, for your listeners who may not be into the weeds on reimbursement, one of the questions that investors always ask is there a code for the procedure that you are offering? And so EUS codes have long been established. And so the reimbursements that Josh is referring to are all based on codes that have been in place for a long, long time, that are reimbursed for the legacy systems and are reimbursed for our system as well. The one challenge that we've worked on in most cases successfully is that extra $650 that we're able to get for the sites that the legacy systems can't. And that requires sometimes some hand-holding and some extra help.
Understood. Well, thank you both very, very much for your time today and your thoughtful analysis of your company and for answering all the questions from our crowd. Thank you, everyone who tuned in today. Hopefully you found this helpful in making an informed investment decision into EndoSound. We're proud to be, partners and investors in EndoSound now, and look forward to your continued success. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Have a wonderful day.